wanted to talk about my Indigenous heritage, my First Nations heritage, specifically Mi'kmaq, and perhaps just a word even about that, what we call ourselves and what the government calls ourselves. The word Indian is something I wouldn't use for myself, yet it's a legal term. The Indian Act, and we have in Canada what's called Indian status, which is it's a legal status, right? And that's based on the Indian Act of 1876. So when we're speaking in legal terms, so-and-so is a status Indian, that means that they have, it's the children going by, that means that they have proven ancestry and DNA. Then for a while, the word Aboriginal came in, and that was without consulting any First Nations people. Then after that, and you can tell who was the Prime Minister by the terms as they changed, that was Harper, Aboriginal. So if you're reading something and you see Aboriginal, you know it was under Harper's watch, who was no friend to Native people. He had to make the apology to the residential schools, and he waited and waited until he was almost done. He did not want to do it, and it wasn't much of an apology. My aunt wrote a book about it, Isabel Knockwood, called Out of the Depths. I'll put a link in the posts or underneath to that. So after that, you know, during all of this, my friends and I used the term Native, just Native, but that's not specific to anything, right? And then, of course, the term Indigenous comes out, but again, everyone's Indigenous to somewhere, so that's not specific. The term that we like to use, most First Nations people, is a term that, well, we use our own nations, so I would say a Mi'kmaq. That's the term that I would use. Someone who's Haudenosaunee would say they're Haudenosaunee, and then what specific nation. So these are my maternal grandparents, William, Zach, and his new wife with their first child, my Aunt Margaret. Margaret didn't live very long. She died of appendicitis. But when this photo was taken, they hadn't yet been put on the reservation. As surprising as that may seem, that didn't happen to them until about 1943, 44. Until then, they still had their own farm. It was a quite large farm in Nova Scotia, in the Annapolis Valley. They were status Indians. They were quite comfortable, and it's told to me that one day, the Indian agent came in with the RCMP, the police, with a pickup truck, and told them they had, it sounds like World War II, doesn't it? Well, it was during the war. Told them they had 10 minutes to take a change of clothing and get on the truck. That was it. My Aunt Helena told me she couldn't even say goodbye to her favorite horse, her horse. My grandmother there on the right, Mary Alice, tried to start packing her favorite dishes. And the Indian agent and the RCMP told her no. The Indian agent said, those are going to my wife. So they could take nothing but a change of clothes with them. So they got on the back of the pickup truck. They had no choice. They drove to the reserve, Sipekne'katik Reserve in Nova Scotia. And they were driven to a little shack. It was 2 rooms. There was no insulation. There was no stove, no heating, no fridge, obviously. There was no furniture, no beds, not even mattresses on the floor, and they only had their one change of clothing. So she said, we froze and we starved. And it was as if nobody cared, nobody did anything. The Indian agent was very cruel. He raped my Aunt Helena. She was about 9 years old then. And he was known for having done that. There was never any compensation for any of this, for the farm, for anything that happened, never. So they eked out the best that they could, which wasn't very good, I suppose. Well, you can imagine living in an unheated house with no furniture and one change of clothes, no food. You couldn't chop down firewood without the Indian agent's permission. You couldn't leave the reserve without his written permission. You had to go see him. A lot of people don't know this. They think it's something that happened hundreds of years ago. They don't know that these kinds of things happened to me personally. I'll get to my story later, and my family. So, and I'll come back to them, but just to introduce you, this would be my great-grandfather. His name was Dowie. And what happened to him in this picture is he was in Halifax in 1939. And he was being recognized then by Queen Elizabeth, who later became the Queen Mother, not the late Queen Elizabeth, her mother. Queen Elizabeth and the King recognized, not given, he was being recognized for his hereditary noble status. And I've had people say to me, oh, we didn't have things like that. Well, yeah, we sure did, and you don't have to go very far back. This is my great-grandfather. The medal he's wearing around his neck was given to him by King George there, that day in Halifax, 1939. In fact, when the royal family came to visit, the Queen Mother visited his grave on her last visit there to Canada. So he would have been living then with my grandparents too, whom I just showed you here. They all lived in the same two little rooms together. They had no choice. And then with them too came my great-grandmother, Julia. Here, Julia had a very, well, all of these stories are tragic, but her story was quite tragic. She went out to beg the Indian agent for help one day. They were just at their wits' end. They didn't know what to do. They couldn't hunt, you couldn't fish, you couldn't chop firewood, you had to depend upon rations. They were trying to garden from what they could, but she went to ask him for help. And someone saw her, a few people did, riding in a vehicle with the Indian agents. Some say it's his brother, some say it was a cousin, whatever it is, it was someone connected with him. And they left in a carriage, actually. This was on the reserve. This would have been about 1945, shortly after they arrived there. They saw her getting into a carriage and driving away, and she said she'll be back very quickly, and she was never seen or heard from again. No one knows what happened to her all these years. She just vanished completely. She had children there, of course, so she planned on coming back, but no one knows what ever happened to her. And that happened with a lot of Indigenous people. They just went missing. And there are still thousands today of missing Indigenous people. So that's a short introduction to my family, and I have plenty of more stories and plenty more things to tell you about them. The night I actually found my birth mother, my mother there, my mother, was the very same night that my grandmother had her funeral there. So it was quite a day for her, I suppose. Of course, I didn't know any of this until just quite recently. That was with what we call the 60 Scoop settlement, which happened about 2 years ago, not quite. And with the 60 Scoop settlement, the government issued an apology. And I was given a check for $21,000 for all of this. I don't think that that's anything. But when I applied for this, the 60 Scoop settlement, I did not check. There was a box you had to check saying you would never sue or bring a case against the government again. You wouldn't go to the media. And I said, no, I'm not checking that. I think I have a right to talk about my own life, for goodness sake. What a way to quiet people. So I didn't sign it, but I sent in the claim, the settlement claim. And I was leaving actually for Mexico the very next morning when the letter came. And I had been teaching, and I got home. It was late afternoon, getting, that's like the day before you're leaving on a trip. And there was a rejection letter, and I thought, how on earth and they had the reasons. You can't list a day or time when you cross the border. And they were bringing us across the borders then, right? You can't list a day and time for when you were removed from your family. And I like the polite word removed. It wasn't removed. It's when you take a child from its family unwillingly, with everyone screaming and yelling and trying to tell you no, and the police are there taking you and you have no warning, and you keep doing it to everyone the same day in the community, throw them in the back of a truck, drive away, change their names, their homes, everything. That's something horrific and quite different. But they use their polite language. So I thought, no, I'm not letting them get away with this. They have destroyed my life. No. So there was a phone number and an email, and I called them. And they just were talking in a very passive way. Yeah, oh, I know, yeah, well, you can resend it, but you have to have the information. And I said, I thought that's part of what all of this is about. The information, the records are all sealed. How can I have the information? How? So she said, well, we'll reconsider and we'll reread it if you can resend. And I said, I'm leaving tomorrow morning at 4 in the morning. That's why I called. I can't resend. And then I thought, she said, well, I'll give you my word. We'll look through it again and we'll get back to you. And I said, repeating myself, I'm leaving tomorrow morning for 3 months. And she just said, okay, well, I'll do my best. And when I hung up, I thought, I know what your best will be. I can imagine what your best will be. So there was an email address, and I thought, they say every telephone call is recorded. Well, that's great. You have a copy of the call, but I sure don't. But I will have a copy of the email. So I wrote an email saying the same thing. This is what the 60 Scoop settlement is about, is to redress wrongs, and that most of us don't know who we are. We've been taken from our families. We can't find them because you won't open the records. So I left for Mexico, and when I came back, there was a little letter there, and that's a story in itself. But when I finally got around to opening it, my claim had been accepted. And though, again, that's without checking the box that I would never bring this up with the government, and that I wouldn't go to the media, and I wouldn't make it public. I did not check that. So I'm glad I didn't, and I wouldn't. And I feel sorry for the other people who did. I really do. But with that, then, I thought, well, what about my records? My birth record, can't I see it? And there was a number there, so I called. It was a counseling hotline, and I said, I'm not calling for the counseling aspect, but I'm wondering, and they were very nice, I'm wondering, I thought our records were going to be opened, and I had hoped to find family now. I'm not getting younger. And they said, no, your records, there were 4 different parts of the 60 Scoop. You fall under what's called termination and relocation. So the records from that era, that part of the 60 Scoop won't be open, they'll remain sealed. And I just said, well, I don't know what to say. And she did say, the woman on the phone, I'll tell you what some people are doing is they're going to one of these ancestry sites. And with that, it's not guaranteed, but a lot of people are having good luck with it. So I said, could you recommend one to me? And she said, I don't know, I don't want to recommend just the one, but I've heard a lot of people are going to Ancestry DNA. But I'd go with, if you can afford it, go with all 3 or however many there are. But a lot of people, for some reason, seem to be going to Ancestry DNA. So that's what I did the very next morning. They sent me the kit, you spit in it and put it in some kind of a preserver. It goes to Ireland. And they tell you it will take a while, and I just thought, okay, it's going to, if it says whatever, I don't even remember how many days, just say, for example, it was 90. I thought, well, then it's probably going to come on day 90, not before. And then to my complete surprise, I opened my email, and there was an email from them with, information. So I clicked on it, went through everything I had to do. And the very next day, my first cousin from Nova Scotia, my Mi'kmaq cousin, emailed me. And then she's been a wonderful support. And with that, she sent me these photos, actually, by the way, filled me in on what happened. I came in contact with my Aunt Helena, who would be the eldest, or second. Margaret's the eldest. I think she'd be the second. No, 1, 2, 3. She's the third. Then there was Aunt Agnes, then Aunt Helena, the third eldest of my grandparents there. She's still alive, just had her 93rd birthday, and told me all sorts of stories that I will continue and tell.